Near the entrance to Glencoe, where it meets Ranach Moor, arrived at a side road to the White Quarries. This was the first of the many ski centres that we now have in Scotland and is situated in the Muilevoody Massif between Ranach Moor and the mouth of Glencoe. The first ski lifts were constructed in 1956. The trip up the mountain in the chairlift was very peaceful indeed. Initially there's not that much to see, but the views over to the west were magnificent, though that soon disappeared too. But the views to the west were soon replaced by a series of wonderful waterfalls for most of the rest of the trip up. We follow the Altnagish as it tumbles down from the mountain streams above to eventually flow into the River Ettin on the floor of the glen below. They are even more spectacular after a spell of rain. We are now nearing the top of this ski lift. There are other lifts to reach the ski runs higher up. The buildings were now coming into view and we were approaching the platform in the first summit. As I get nearer, the attendant came out to help me down from the ski lift. I left the ski lift station and headed over towards the path to the summit of Craig Dhu. As I reached a small bridge, I noticed a series of attractive waterfalls down below. I decided to go down for a closer look. I decided to head back up to the main path. I carried on across the metal bridge and the path that led to the summit of Craig Dhu. Craig Dhu is just an outlier of Muilevoody and is just short of 2,500 feet high. An easy path leads up to its summit. I headed on up the path. There seemed to be a cairn up ahead. It was certainly well constructed with a very interesting top part to it. I eventually reached a bit of a flat area with wonderful views to the west, particularly where the Buachaletive Moor stands at the entrance to both Glenetive and Glencoe. To the left are the rugged outliers of Creesha, and across Glenetive are the many Munros that make up the Buachaletive Moor, the most prominent one being Stob Gerag. It was now time to head for the summit of Craig Dhu. You don't feel the same sense of achievement when you've made most of the trip up the mountain comfortably perched in a ski lift, but at my age it's good to be able to reach the top of a mountain again. In the floor of the glen, a small side road leads from the King House Hotel to a few lodges. I took one last look over to the Buachal. It certainly is an eye-catcher in this wonderful morning light. I was heading down now. Strawn na Creesha was just ahead. The mountain views from here are quite superb. The buildings around the ski lift station were now coming back into view as I made my way back down. I had enjoyed my short visit to the mountain and I headed back to the station to get the ski lift back down. I was now back on board the chairlift. The views on the way down were completely different from the way up. The ski centre buildings below had come back into view and it was fascinating to watch the ski chairs in front gradually dropping down below you as the slope to the bottom started to steepen. We were now nearing the base station and the many paths for walkers could be made out just below. Many cyclists use the ski lift to transport their mountain bikes to the top, then cycle some of the many exhilarating cycle tracks. I was now approaching the base station. Gradually, the attendant moved forward to guide the chairlift passengers in. It was time to return to Glencoe again. I stopped at a lay-by and got out for a look. I remember stopping here a few years ago with Roberta on one of her many trips up the west coast. This is yet another picturesque corner of the glen. I made my way down to the rocks. The Three Sisters form one of the most magnificent panoramas in the glen. They're not Munros, merely the outliers of Munros. They're made up of Ben Fada, Yarunach, and at the far end, Craig Dhu, the tallest of the three, and just over 20 metres short of Munro status. Surrounded on all sides by much larger mountains, they are still the ones that catch your eye. A visit to Glen Coe will always remain one of the main highlights of any trip to the Highlands. I was heading on to the Glencoe Visitor Centre, where there's an excellent reconstruction of a typical 17th century dwelling. This turf and creel house was constructed after a dig by the Trust's archaeologists was carried out at where the Achtriachtan settlement was situated. It is laid out to the same dimensions as the flagstones uncovered on the site and built with the aid of historical data with the same material that was used at that time. It really is an exceptional construction. The house is only sparsely furnished at the moment. Food would have been cooked over an open fire as shown here. There would have been no chimney and smoke would diffuse through the thatched roof. This part of the house would have been used to keep all the livestock. The tools would have been kept here as well. The flagstones in the floor were raised to keep out the rain. Cattle were brought into the house at night because it offered additional heat to the building. Due to the Glencoe Massacre of 1692 and the Highland clearances, there is little or nothing left of the 17th century Glencoe clachans, but at that time the glen was home to over 400 clansmen. The Glencoe settlement of that time was made up of several small groups of cottages like this, dotted about the glen. The furthest east was Achtriachtan, sited across the glen from the Three Sisters. The settlements of Achnacon and Inverriggen were both quite near Signal Rock. It is the aim of the National Trust to extend this project in the not too distant future, and I look forward to that. Another mile brings us to the village, and again the mountain backdrop surrounding the village is breathtaking. This was the settlement of Carnach. While I was there, I decided to visit the attractive craft and coffee shop for a look around. I had already eaten at the excellent visitor centre cafe before I left. It was now time to carry on with my adventure. A couple of hundred yards from the bridge of Coe, we find the Massacre of Glencoe monument standing on top of a huge rocky mound. It faces in Tor and the mountains beyond. It was in that area of the glen that most of the MacDonald clansmen were massacred. The tall, tapering 18-foot-tall granite cross stands atop a rough-cut cairn and was sculpted by Alexander MacDonald of Aberdeen. The Glencoe MacDonalds were well known as a rough, unruly clan, and the glen was generally avoided. But despite that, the way that this was carried out was an absolute disgrace, and the disgusting clearances that followed were every bit as bad. It's nothing short of genocide. I was now heading to Antor. On the way there, I stumbled on this little gem, the Torren Lochan. It's just beside the road to the Clachaig, but it's surrounded by trees and can be easily missed. The wonderful reflection in the water made up for the disappointment I felt when I failed to see any reflection in my recent visit to the Glen Coe lochan. Glencoe never fails to astound you. It encapsulates everything required to make a visit to the Highlands unforgettable.